Welcome, everyone. Good to see everyone getting settled. Waiting just a moment. There's a lot of people arriving. Ed's ushering them in as quickly as he can. I hope that you'll enjoy the sound of the bell as it invites us to sit. as we continue to sit together just for a few more minutes, there's a reminder I'd like to offer into the space, which many of you will be quite familiar with, but it's always good to remember because it's so easy to slip away from these foundational pieces of our practice. The first one of the two that I want to remind you is when we reflect on stories of our practice ancestors, our teachers, historical figures from the past, or archetypal imagery of awakened beings, it's natural to think, what did these people do to cultivate the kind of presence, the wisdom and compassion that they seem to express in the old stories or in their writings? And the reminder is they were doing exactly what we are all doing right now. Not something similar, exactly what you're doing right now. No matter what their tradition or particular practices, it included at its heart the willingness and the ability to sit in silence and stillness, to open to the world of their own inner experience and the world around them, and to meet it. We call it zazen in our tradition, this sitting in upright stillness with a bit of dignity and attention, without attempting to strive for anything particular, but to not to turn away from anything either. What all of the ancestors, all the teachers of the past did was what you're doing right now. So you have the practice. The second reminder, because it's the follow-up question that people ask me. Well, yes, I can do the practice, but they were different. They were special. It's a very painful error. Every being, every wise woman, every Buddha were born, had a body, lived with their families, navigated the culture they were in. They grew up to some degree, met difficulties and joys, ultimately lived out their life. Maybe they got old, but all eventually died. They were working with exactly the same elements that we're working with. They were not different. They were human. And their practices were the same. You're not missing anything. Everything is here. It's nothing special. Nothing is really hidden. This is it. This is the this is the Pure Land. And stopping in this way and being fully present in this way helps us remember. By taking our seats in this way together, we're in essence saying by our actions, I will join all the ancestors, all our friends who came before us practicing. And in a moment, we'll chant the robe chant, which is saying to ourselves and avowing to each other that I will clothe myself in this practice life, just as they did, and join and know that we're part of the unending legacy of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space and time. This is who we are. And our aspiration is to wake up and know this. So let's use our voices together now. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Wonderful to see you all, making sure I can see the whole bunch of you. I uh, warned you last time that I was going to continue with my post-COVID book report, a little bit of Dharma book reports. Last time I spoke about the novel Beautyland, and today I'm going to do some teaching that comes from this book, Lost and Found by Catherine Schultz. But I'm going to give you some context. Again, last week, I think I shared with you that I wrote down, it's not exactly the Four Noble Truths or the Four Practice Principles, but there are ways that I think about how I orient myself to practice. And so I'll remind you what I said last time and what I wrote down. Number one is the obvious: suffering and dissatisfaction are woven into the fabric of life. It's a little different than saying life is characterized by suffering. Suffering and dissatisfaction are woven into the fabric of our life. Second one is, but freedom and beauty are equally woven into the fabric of life. Freedom and beauty are equally woven. Number three, the liberating realizations of the Buddha that everything changes and everything is interdependent helps us begin to understand this weaving and this fabric. In other words, our lives. I try to make it as clear as I can about what we're up to here. And then finally, number four, all of this that we're pointing to in these conceptual ways is already being lived out in every moment, whether we notice it or not. And our practice is to help us notice it. But the total reality of life is just this everyday living. And when we relinquish or step back from our small individual self-centered perspectives, we're able to offer ourselves to the world and care for the world. I think that maybe those 4 things that I wrote last time, I think I sent them to Cass, and maybe she put them with the recording. I think, yep, she says thumbs up. She did. I'll send them again because I have a little take on them. This book, Lost and Found, Reflections on Gratitude, Grief, and Happiness. The author talks about how things come and they go, how we lose things and how we find things. And when we're breathing and sitting in zazen and breathing, we're enacting this, so letting go and taking in, letting go, taking in the most fundamental way. So if I read through my list again, I would say, number 1, suffering and dissatisfaction are woven into the fabric of life. Suffering and dissatisfaction are woven into losing and finding, losing and finding, losing and finding, breathing in and breathing out. And that second one, freedom and beauty, are equally woven. Losing and finding are equally the weaving of freedom and beauty. Breathing in, breathing out. And those liberating insights of the Buddha about impermanence and interdependence, it's nothing more than saying everything comes and everything goes, losing and finding. Breathing in, it's the same thing every time. And that final one about this is already being lived out, this is our life, but we can notice and care for each other because we're always finding and losing. We're always receiving and losing constantly. So this lost and found is another way of just saying impermanence. Impermanence, which makes everything possible. We think of it as losing everything, but it makes everything possible. Everything is contingent on everything else. But it looks to us as we stand in our lives like things are coming and going. And we call this the great matter of birth and death, of life and death. The great matter of loss and discovery, of having and losing. And this is why we have a very simple and profound practice, zazen, which is the enactment of all of this reality. We just simply sit in silence and stillness with some dignity and uprightness, and we breathe. And we watch it all come and go. So we can understand that as the foundation of what it means to live a life. I'll say a tiny bit about this particular book since I'm referencing it, like I would if we were studying the Diamond Sutra. I'd say, oh, it was written by this person, it came from this time. It's a memoir. It's by a Pulitzer Prize winning author. And it reflects on loss. Specifically, she tells about losing her father, that was very dear to her. And at the very same time, something found where she meets her partner that she falls in love with at the same time. And this part from the publisher I thought was sweet. They write, contending simultaneously with wild joy and terrible grief. There we find ourselves sometimes, right? Contending simultaneously with wild joy and terrible grief. Those twin experiences form the heart of the book. A profound meditation on the families that make us and the families we make. And I would also include the spiritual communities that shape us and the spiritual communities we shape and make. So it's a bit of a memoir and a guidebook about loss and grief and joy. And so again, if I were reading from my favorite translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi of the words of the Buddha, or if I was reading from a major Mahayana sutra like the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Platform Sutra, or if I was reading some fascicle from Dogen's masterwork Shobogenzo, which we reference all the time, or any number of the koans from the many collections, like the Gateless Gate or the Blue Cliff Record. These are all classic things. That you would think, oh, there's a Zen teacher teaching Zen things. But today I'm reading from a scripture called the Memoir and Essays. And when Dogen or the Buddha or anybody else was writing way back then, or Huining, they were contemporary people writing about their experience, just like Catherine Schultz is writing about her experience now. That's why I reminded you of what I did in Zazen. It's happening now. This practice is happening now. And one of the key things which all Zen teachers help us with is this distinction falls away between what's ordinary and what's holy, between what we think is everyday and sacred. That begins to dissolve in practice. So rather than a large hardback volume of some ancient teacher, I have this paperback. And in it, I found Dharma, so I'm going to teach Dharma using this scripture, just like I would some classical scripture. And I'm going to give you a small context. Late in the book, the author's talking to her father-in-law. His name is Bill. And he says to her, I've often thought that for a completely average person, I've lived a remarkable life. And she said, he grew up in a house that didn't even have indoor plumbing. But when he was saying this statement to her, he had a cell phone in his pocket. It said, it's quite a life. But then she makes a reflection, and I copied it down, and I actually offered this reflection at my friend DeWitt's 80th birthday recently. Here's what she wrote and what I read. I'll make a few comments in it. The author, reflecting on her father-in-law's comment about his life being extraordinary, she said, I knew what he meant, because I too feel that way. That my days are exceptional even when they're ordinary. That existence does not need to show us any of its more famous or spectacular wonders to fill us with amazement. We live remarkable lives because life itself is remarkable. A fact that is impossible not to notice if only suffering leaves us alone for long enough. That's a clever statement, but I don't think suffering will actually leave us alone. It doesn't work exactly that way. But we can learn not to fight with our sufferings and our failings. And we can learn not to run from our suffering. This is me speaking here. And that's what Zazen offers us. It offers us a practice of not being entangled in the suffering, of sitting with some willingness and upright dignity in the midst of it all, including the indignities that life will bring us. Sitting with all of that. We live remarkable lives because life itself is remarkable. And then she goes on. She said, lately, and this really resonated with me quite a bit, and I know it did with DeWitt. That's why I read it to him. Said, lately, I found this everyday remarkableness almost overwhelming. These last few years, I've been more susceptible than usual to emotion. And I'm going to pause. Any of you feel like as you go further you go, the more you leak? Right over the top of what I'm looking at, I see Steve. Yeah. There. And then she says, or rather one emotion in particular. As far as I know, it has no name in our language, although it is close. And forgive me, Jeanette, if I say this wrong, close to what the Portuguese call saudade or something like that, saudade, anyway. And that this, it derives from the Latin word of solitude. It's often associated with a repressed understanding. One might never encounter the object of their longing ever again. It's a kind of a feeling. Anyway, she goes on. And she also says, or the Japanese call it mono no aware. And I looked this up. In Zen, it's a common the common symbol for it is like a cherry blossom, briefly perfect but falling. So I'll go on with her. She says, it's the feeling of registering how lovely life is and how fragile and how fleeting. It's not quite the same as awe because it has too much of the everyday in it, and too much sorrow too. For the same reason, it's not the feeling the romantics identified as the sublime, a mingle of like admiration and dread, evoked by the vast impersonal grandeur of the physical world. But this feeling I'm talking about has none of that splendor or terror. And this I loved. It said it is made up instead of gratitude, longing, and a note I can only call anticipatory grief. Those of us that are getting older feel this, right? That's gratitude and longing and anticipatory grief. Among English words, she writes, its nearest kin might be bittersweet. The awareness that our love in all its many forms is inseparable from grief. You know, not sadness, not depression. That's the sweet part of the bittersweet. But being touched by the world, at least for me, in its most ordinary presentations, it's like, well, I think that's like the genius of Mary Oliver and every other poet who draws our attention to the seemingly mundane in a way that makes us feel like we're entering a great cathedral, even when we're just wading along the edge of a small pond in the woods. There's that kind of feeling. So Schultz goes on in this last bit. She says, it's a measure of how porous I am at present, that this feeling can be provoked by almost anything. Basic human decency, extraordinary acts of courage, works of art that remind me of the inexplicable brilliance of our species. I would add a performance at the Olympics, a small musical event I see on Instagram that makes me weep, or an unexpected note maybe your child leaves for you, or a message from a dying friend, these kind of things. She ends this part by saying, if anything, I'm amazed that we aren't all overcome more often by this mingling of gratitude and grief. So I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but this feeling, this is the context that I was feeling. Remember, I was reading this in a dark hotel room with COVID, alone at an airport. And so I'll just read a couple of other segments just because they're so beautiful. And the little themes that I found in them is life is and death is what's happening. Life goes on. Life goes on without us. Impermanence is the Buddha. And we go on together. Here's a few little snippets before we end here. And now this is your reading time. Let's see. 2:31. I lost my place. Mm-hmm. You know, in the beginning of the book, she talks about, she said, I've always disliked euphemisms for dying, like passed away, gone home, no longer with us, departed. You know these things? She says, I like what the poet Robert Lowell wrote. He said, why not just say what happened? And this is what we're up to in practice, isn't it? To tell the truth. But then later in the book, at the end, she says, it's true that people so often tell us in the face of hardship or heartache, life goes on. And she talks about how she's liked that expression because it doesn't, pull any punches or anything. But sooner or later, you're going to have to You're going to have to move past what you can be so immersed in. And then this is the part I thought was curious. She said, nobody ever says life goes on after someone falls in love. But it does. As wonderful as those early days are, and she goes on to describe all the things you've done many times, eventually some new development will command your attention, and then some new development again and again. It just keeps on going. Life goes on. And then a few pages later, after she describes many other things, the other next teaching I thought was beautiful. And she says, this is the essential difficulty of our situation. Life goes on, but we do not. Life goes on, but we do not. We stop. Perhaps the devout are right, and some part of us will endure beyond the grave, but either way, existence as we know it, falling in love, grieving, going to the grocery store, splashing in the ocean, driving at night with the music up and the windows down, and every detail, good and difficult, living out our days here amongst the egrets and herons and black bears and fleas, all of this ceases absolutely upon our death. That's the very essence of what it means to be mortal. Yet it's difficult to fully imagine, let alone accept. Our lives are literally everything to us, and they feel so brimming and momentous while we are living them that it's hard to grasp how fleeting they are compared to the whole of human history, to say nothing of the vast sweep of space and time. And I thought as I was reading this, there's a poignancy to it, but it's also a beautiful description of the relative and the absolute. We're caught in this small life, and yet we can feel as we practice we're part of this larger thing. And we're always living in that dual nature, the two truths that you teach in Buddhism. She goes on, and this is where we start edging into the Bodhisattva vow. We are here above all as caretakers, a role as essential as it is temporary. None of us would be here without what came before us, and none of us can know how much and in what ways everything that will come after us depends upon our being here. And that's all we have this moment with the world. It will not last because nothing lasts. Entropy, mortality, extinction, the entire plan of the universe consists of losing and finding, of course. And no matter how much we find along the way, life amounts to a reverse savings account in which we're eventually robbed of everything. I don't know about robbed, but our dreams and plans and jobs and knees and backs and memories, the keys to the house, the keys to the car, the keys to the kingdom itself. Sooner or later, all of it drifts into the valley of lost things. That's kind of a beautiful description of, and a poignant description of what's lost. And I'm going to read this last ending, and then I'll be done with my reading here. Time and carrying on will carry almost all of what we know of life away. And here's the essence, I think, a very beautiful description of the foundation of Dharma and the great matter. She says, nothing about this is strange and surprising. It isn't, is it? Nothing about what I'm reading is strange or surprising. The astonishment is all in the being here. It's the turtle in the pond, the thought in your mind, the falling star, the stranger on Main Street. It's the sunlit green I saw in my partner's eyes again first thing this morning, and the happiness I will feel in an hour or two when we end up in each other's arms. To all of this, loss, which seems only to take away, adds its own kind of necessary contribution. It isn't just loss. No matter what goes missing, the object you need or the person you love, the lessons are always the same. And here's the Dharma. Disappearance reminds us to notice. Transience, to cherish. Fragility, to defend. Loss is a kind of external conscience, urging us to make better use of our finite days. Our crossing is a brief one, best spent bearing witness to all that we see, honoring what we find noble, tending what we know needs our care, recognizing that we are inseparably connected to it all, including what is not yet upon us, including what is already gone. And she ends with the final bit of the Bodhisattva vow. We're here to keep watch, not to keep. So those lists, disappearance reminds us to notice. This is a reminder of why we sit zazen, why we practice mindfulness. Transience reminds us to cherish. That's the whole Metta Sutta. Fragility reminds us to defend. We're all vulnerable and we care for each other. And then when she says our crossing is a brief one, best spent bearing witness to all that we see, bearing witness is the foundation of our practice. And in the bearing witness, she has another list, honoring what we find noble. Which is often each other, bowing to each other. Tending what we know needs our care, which is the whole world around us and each other. And recognize that we are inseparably connected to it all. What came before and what comes after. And then the final, we are here to keep watch, not to keep. So ends the reading of the sutra. I thought they were wonderful teachings, from a contemporary person who does not think of themselves as a Dharma teacher at all. But I think that it's our job in some ways to find the truth of the Dharma in everyday life. So it's not something separate out there that we will touch on, that there's Buddhist practice, and then we go back to our life. It's the same thing. That's what we're practicing. So there's a seamless moving together, losing and finding, and what comes next. The book is interesting. It's in 3 sections. Lost, found, and. That's all. And all the other. And this is our practice. We breathe in, we breathe out, and everything else happens. Our job is to pay attention and to take care and to let ourselves be porous enough to feel that sort of poignancy in a way of what it means to be alive, and that everyone else is feeling that too. So it's good to take care of them as well. So these are some of her reflections and some of mine about my own life. And those things just resonated deeply in me when I was feeling vulnerable and ill and reading these things. And I'm wondering how they move in you now, not just what your experience has been, but is there an edge of your practice that this calls forward in some way? That would be good for us to meet about. If we were in once again, if we were in retreat and you came to see me for practice discussion, what would you bring? In our retreats, often we would just tap every single person. You're not asking for anything. It's like you just got to show up. And if I tapped you, like for example, Cassie, if I tapped you on the shoulder, it's like, okay, you got to unmute now. Do it. It'll set you up. And meaning you had to come into the Dokusan room and do your bow and show up. What would you say?
I'd say after last week's inquiry, and as we were kind of talking about the same thing, it I stayed onto the porch, which was wonderful. And we were talking about that, and it came up in conversation. And somebody asked me about it, and I didn't feel like I could. I judged my response, and uh, so I'm trying to, be kind to my judgment about myself there, but
That's a practice edge right there.
yeah, and what I want to do though is hold both of these things equally.
Mm.
That we're talking about the same coin. That there's not one and then the other. There's not like this divide of good and evil or right and wrong. That there's this of lost and found, like all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and not to bring my focus to not be attaching to one or the other. And for my identity, like as I'm thinking about, as I've told Laguna that I won't be back next summer. So I have so much identity in a job role that is fading. Um, and so, like, in claymation, like if I am just the ball of clay, and the ball of clay is constantly changing, you know, my I feel like my true identity is in only the moment of meeting. That it's not a thing and it's not in me, it's the meeting. Um, and so that's where I am with these things, and I'd love to hear.
Well, thank you for your Dharma talk. That was wonderful. Thank you for your teaching. That was wonderful. Absolutely. And then we'll see because Sue and Sasha have their hands up, so we'll see what they bring. And imagine that you're going to sit there too, just like me, and imagine they're bringing themselves to you. Okay? What? You would say something else before you go? Nope. No. Okay. Sue was next, I think. There she goes.
Hi, Flint.
Hi.
When you said I was coming into the room with you, I just got pulled forward. It was kind of shocking to me.
But you know the feeling.
And I know the feeling. When you're talking about all the interweaving of everything and how it goes and how we live with in the duality of things. And in the last few weeks, I've just had this strange thing in that I just feel like I have people's hands are on me. They're touching me. They're just touching me. They're just gentle. They're just, it's, I don't know, it's a little freaky, but
you feel their presence in a physical way.
I feel, yes. And
Present.
it's even happens to me with strangers. I feel like they're just kind of, we're just kind of reaching for each other in this way. Nothing odd, just it comes from the inside and it reaches my insides.
So it's not an unwelcome touching at all.
Oh no, it isn't unwelcome at all. It's quite wonderful. And I'm, it's just, where'd this come from? I'm thinking,
Well, it's come from,
and your talk today,
80-something years of experience.
It is. It's an aging thing. I mean, you mentioned several things about as you're older, how you experience things differently. And I just thought, well, that's just part of it. Just enjoy it. And I find that when I go out, I'm aware in a different way of other people. And
Yeah, so for to you, the idea of mutual causality, interpenetration, mutual, the way we interact and we are actually part of each other is no longer an idea.
I guess it isn't. No,
No, it's
I
a
think
physical
that's right.
reality. It's like you realize that we touch each other in ways that, and fortunately, you're feeling it in that tender, kind way that the Metta Sutta
Oh,
suggests.
yes, yes.
Yes, there are difficulties. Yes, there's pain. Yes, there's all that stuff.
Oh, of course.
But at its core, we're just here together. We're just here for a very small time.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, one thought was, well, maybe I'm going to be kicking off real soon. And this is toward the end. And I thought, well, pretty nice, isn't it?
Well,
I mean,
if that were true, it's not so bad.
If that were true, it's not so bad. I mean, who knows? But your talk today really did. And I'm going to get this book. So I thank you.
Thank you. I was talking about just texting with someone this morning, and we were talking about the way we're touched by just simply going the distance. She said, something was talking about just going the distance.
Yeah,
something about that. So let's continue until we don't.
Let's do. Thank you.
There you go. So good to see you.
Oh, good to see you too, Flint. Thank you. Wow, boy. I raised my hand when I was listening to what Cassie had to share. That's where my hand went up. I mean, the many things that you shared really speak to the edges and experience that I have as I recently retired, waiting for extraordinary. Boy, the first day of retirement, the sun came up and the sun went down, and I was waiting for extraordinary.
This new life.
And I haven't arrived, and I kept waiting for that. And then some of my experiences that I shared with you in private earlier, and what you read in the book really connected for me when I was running, and my wife was running on the opposite side of the road, and I saw her in my just kind of unprovoked, like a smile. I smile at her for no reason and wave and don't know why. And I noticed that, and like you said, in the book it says it's lovely, brief, yet calm and left. That's what it was. Like I couldn't describe what is it.
Well, also like Sue just said, it's almost like you didn't think about waving or smiling at your wife. Your body did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that touching and being touched? Your body knew to respond. There's just, there's love.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then at the end, you said, we have to keep watch, not to keep. And I was like, because I was like, I would like more of that. But I'm not here to keep it or to try to hang on to that or make it happen again. Just to keep watching. Oh, wow, it happened.
Well, that's that Japanese phrase, mono no aware, like about the peach blossom. It's like beautiful flow.
Mm-hmm.
And we appreciate it because it's so temporary. And we have these loving relationships, hopefully, which last a long time. Sometimes we're fortunate, but that's still temporary. When you see your wife, and it's even the imagery is interesting. You're running past each other, like you're running toward each other at one point, and then you pass,
right.
then you're running away from each other. That's how it's going.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of you will lose the other first. You just don't know who.
right? Mm, yeah. And also when Casey was talking about work and how like losing that disappearance remind me to notice, like, but I've noticed how I was attached to product meaning control. I was like on that cycle.
Mhm.
And how right now, like my ego bumping into my soul every day, trying to figure out who I am.
Yeah. As you slowly soften your grip on that old identity.
Yeah.
And some days it's easy, some days you get knocked down. It's like, I love the word I can never say, the thing
Неваляшка.
say it right.
Неваляшка. Неваляшka.
Yeah, it's that you punch it goes down, but it comes back up again.
Right.
Yeah,
Mm.
come back.
And like it's centerish, like you said, it remains, it's never like steady.
It finds its center.
Centered.
But the only way it finds the center is by wobbling. It doesn't come back to center, it wobbles. That's how it finds the center. That's how you find it. That's how I find it. We're all over the place. The center is always there.
Right. And that's my edge, because now I thought, oh, the day have arrived. Now I'm going to be centered. Well,
You're lucky for a minute.
right. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And thanks for sharing your experiences. Cassie's a great teacher, isn't she? She invites these things.
Thank you, Casey.
Was there something else that you didn't get to say, Cassie? I just wanted to check back.
No.
You finished? Okay. Just wanted to check.
Thank you.
There's Sam. Might as well continue our conversation.
Oops. Chet and I are right next to each other, so the sound.
Somebody has to move.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I know we're almost out of time, so I just some part of me wanted to speak to this word porous that you used twice and that Sue brought in, because and the other language you used around, it wasn't the Portuguese word, the saudade, it was the Japanese term about, say it again.
We both turned our sound off.
At the transients.
Oh shit, can you turn yours back on? That's
yeah. Only one. If you have two, talk to each other.
I'm so sorry. There's something special about the wobbling and then the coming back together.
A couple here, just like he was talking.
The acoustics and the coupling, yeah. Anyway, I guess I wanted to just acknowledge that the porosity, when there's great loss or great grief or great inspiration, there seems to be this function out in my experience, you do become profoundly porous, and in that way you have access to worlds and information and sensations and really not knowings that are so precious. And then you go back to your Lord of crusty, hardened, perception of realities. But there's a wonderful anthropologist who studies porosity of mind as it relates to spiritual experiences. And I just, Sue, I really appreciated you naming that. It's just so gorgeous and powerful.
Her description of her experience of it was very nice and very direct.
Yeah, it was really very moving. So I wanted to just say that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying, pardon me, about having access. And it's not like simply that we're tuned into some other distant, strange world. It's all here. Yeah, but suddenly we become awake to it and we become touched by it and it moves through us and we realize that's always happening.
Yeah.
Like if you think about how many signals from these things
Mm-hmm.
are going through the room you're in right now, it's innumerable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a thing that picks it up, you don't know. But our practice lets us suddenly realize, oh, there's all this moving through us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a receptor. Now we wake up to what's actually happening.
Yeah, it reminded me when we were on retreat in the Hui about everything that we were remembering was sitting in stillness, and there's your antenna, you know.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful, so simple, and our ancestors, so grateful for them.
Yeah. For us, it's a good word.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, a good analogy for awake.
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming, like Catherine said. It can be too much.
Yeah. And luckily, we have ways of using our circuit breakers to pare it down a little bit so we can come back maybe.
Yeah.
Good to exhale before we take the next inhale.
Indeed. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming forward.
Yeah, it's good to see everyone. Thank you.
And I'm glad Chet's there. I can feel it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did have a question about.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, forget it. No, I'll do it
Pop
later.
Chet in there.
Can he have, we only have a minute, right? So he
That's
can.
okay.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm not doing it. You're nervous. Am I on video? I don't know where things are coming from.
I can hear you, Chet, and I can see the little.
Oh no, I got pant. Now there's too little time. I love the question of porosity, and I was questioning. My question, I guess, to you, Flint, would be, how do you develop that muscle of porosity? Because when I first came in here, I was so anxious seeing all these wonderful people, but I didn't want to have any porosity. So I noticed I closed my eyes and didn't want to relate. And being in here and seeing the beautiful of the teaching and the people is such a safe, beautiful space. Your heart kind of naturally just becomes more porous, and I feel myself much more comfortable. But clearly there was a point in life where that porosity muscle wasn't available to me. It was either control that porosity by removing yourself completely. And so I guess my question is, how do you, what's the best way in which practicing that in this life not be overwhelmed, not be underwhelmed? Like what,
That's a good question.
yeah, I'm not sure what the question is, but there's something about living life, but not being stuck in unporousness, not too much porousness, but controlling that permeability.
Well, that was the essential teaching of the Buddha, the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. How do you find a way to stand in the center? It's like the thing that Sasha was talking about. You've lost your audio. You'll see. The main thing, and since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just say what's beautiful is that you were watching your experience. Noticed when you were not as available, then you noticed when you were available, and it actually happened on its own.
You're right.
You didn't have to develop a muscle. What you had to do is just step out of your own way. And that's what our practice is about: stepping back, stepping out of our own way and stepping into the moment. And you notice, oh, it's there for you all the time. It's not something you have to cultivate. It's something that's in you that you can wake up to. And you just notice that it did it just fine.
As long as you're still like, but sorry, the echo's too bad. Next time.
You're still what?
Can we turn that off for something? My head goes haywire when I can't hear my own thinking. I guess the problem is, like, I can't do it.
Here's what we'll do.
Yeah.
Everybody mute. Everybody mute.
Okay.
Okay. And now what we're going to do, since we're at the end, is we're going to chant the 4 practice principles, which is the answer to your question. Okay. So here we go. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way.
Thank you all, everybody, for being here. And I just want to briefly remind you that Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity, and your support makes the ultimate difference. So there is a link for contributions on the website. Please visit as you will. Obviously, thank you so much again, Flint. And if anyone would like to continue to meet for maybe the next, 25 minutes or so, just pop yourself into gallery view, stay online, and we will have our after inquiry porch. Thank you.